Hello and welcome to our second video where we discuss different topics around domestic abuse. A couple of weeks ago we shared our initial video with you where we discussed how the police and our partner agencies could support you if you came forward and made a report of domestic abuse. We also said that we were hoping that the video was the first of a series where we discussed topics relating to domestic abuse that you wanted to know about. So we put a poll out across our social media channels inviting you to tell us what you wanted to hear about next and what was important to you. A huge thank you to all of you who have voted and given us some feedback. Your responses were very loud and clear, and you wanted us to talk about coercive and controlling behaviour and about the support and services on offer for male victims of domestic abuse. Okay, so today we're going to talk about coercive control. What is it? How to recognise the signs of coercive and controlling relationship, and how the police identify and investigate a report of coercive control. We're also going to talk about our advice and support services available to you through IDAS, Independent Domestic Abuse Service, who are the largest specialist charity in Yorkshire, supporting anyone experiencing or affected by domestic abuse or sexual violence. And we're very privileged to work with that huge professional team. Then in our next video, which will follow in the next week or so, we'll discuss male domestic abuse victims and the help and support that is available to you. Firstly, just to introduce who we have online today. I'm Chief Inspector Al Wescott and I'm the Deputy Lead for Safeguarding for North Yorkshire Police. And next to me, you'll see we have Carmel Offord from IDAS with us today. Carmel works for IDAS, which is a charity who we work very closely with across the force area, who offer advice and support service for anyone who has experienced domestic abuse and coercive control. Hello, Carmel.
Hi, Al. Great to be with you today.
Okay, a little bit later on we'll also be joined by Detective Constable Amy Beveridge, who has investigated domestic abuse cases for many years where coercive control has been involved. She's going to talk to us about the signs the police look for and what steps we will take to successfully safeguard victims. So what exactly is coercive and controlling behaviour? Coercive control behaviour became an offence around December 2015, and what I'm going to just do now, because I want to make this as easily definable as possible, really, because there is a definition that coercive and controlling behaviour is, and I'm going to just go through what the elements of that definition are. Okay, so coercive and controlling behaviour is defined as an act or a pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation and intimidation or other abuse that is used to harm, punish or frighten a victim. Controlling behaviour is a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate and or dependent by isolating them from sources of support, exploiting their resources and capacities for personal gain, depriving them of the means needed for independence, resistance and escape, and regulating their everyday behaviour. But what does this actually mean in reality? That's the challenge here for a victim who's vulnerable to recognise the signs that you or a friend may be in a relationship with someone who is actually coercive and or controlling. So that's a significant challenge. You know, it can be a challenge for professionals, but the difficulty is if you are within that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Al. And it's really important to explain that definition to people, but I think it still can feel quite mystifying. So, you know, it is kind of giving real life examples. What do we mean when we're talking about this coercive and controlling behaviour? It can involve a whole range of behaviours. So it might include some violence, it might not. It might include, you know, as we've described, some threats. It might just include things to control your everyday behaviour, such as telling you what to wear, who you can see, but that might not be as obvious that that person is doing that. It might be disguised as something that feels quite normal, and quite often, you know, relationships that go on to be abusive and where there is significant domestic abuse might start off feeling wonderful. That person might feel really charming, and they might you know, it might feel like a really loving relationship. It might be, you know, the kind of imaginary feeling that you would want to get when you start a really positive relationship. And I think that's what sometimes catches people out, that these people are, you know, who are abusers aren't often, you know, obvious. They don't fit a particular stereotype. They can be from all walks of life, as can people who are affected by domestic abuse. It doesn't affect one type of person. So I think that's really important to say. And also the coercive and controlling behaviour legislation has come in to act as a definition of the wider forms of domestic abuse. So that, you know, emotional abuse, the financial abuse, the ways of controlling people that aren't, you know, as obvious as the physical signs of domestic abuse, which I think everybody understands those a bit more, and might be a bit more aware of the warning signs.
So what you're describing there, Carmel, is it's almost like this is like a drip, drip, drip. It happens over a period of time. A relationship deteriorates and abuse and control creeps in, and there are so many subtleties there that when you're living in that relationship, it might just not trigger. There might be some really slight nuances that you might not notice, but a family friend might do, in terms of your change in demeanour, how you act in public, or not coming out, or not being available to come out. Or it might actually be that there's negative comments or appearances about your clothes, or somebody that's overly critical of you or something like that, or tries to humiliate you or put you down.
That's it, exactly. And I think, you know, for a lot of people, it does kind of creep in over time. You know, a survivor of domestic abuse that I once heard speaking at a conference described it as almost like a carbon monoxide poisoning effect. You know, you almost don't know it's happening until it's too late, and you're in it very deeply, because it can be really difficult to spot the signs. And that's because people who use these abusive tactics, you know, will quite often disguise them as romantic gestures or as concern. So it might be, oh, you know, I'll come and pick you up at 10 o'clock when you've been out with your friends, because I don't want you walking home on your own. I want to keep you safe. And then you say, oh, but that feels a bit early, but it's, oh, but that's when I can come out to get you. So it can be all these ways of just making it feel like it's a really loving relationship. There are some signs at early doors in these relationships that are something to look out for, and those have been identified by Dr. Jane Monckton Smith, who reviewed a huge number of domestic homicide timelines to identify some of the patterns in abusive behaviour that could highlight when things could start escalating to a point where, you know, that violence might turn into something that caused serious injury, harm, or death. And it is worth really noting that, you know, sometimes I think people think of coercive controlling behaviour of just the emotional abuse, and that's not it. It is much more detailed than that, and it can be just as dangerous even if there is no physical violence, because all those warning signs can be there that it might escalate to violence being used and there being harm. And also it's worth noting that emotional abuse, a lot of survivors of domestic abuse tell us that is what causes the most long-term impact on them and their lives. So this 8-stage timeline identifies a few things right in the early stages of a relationship. And I just wanted to share this with you because I think it's really important for people to watch out for this. So a pre-relationship history. So this is where a partner might have experienced domestic abuse at that person's hands. There might have been a criminal record or allegations from former partners of controlling or domestic abuse or stalking. Sometimes, you know, there might be that aware of reports. You know, you might have been aware that there have been reports, but that person's maybe saying, oh, well, that was a long time ago, or that person made false allegations against me. Not always is this the case, but sometimes that pre-relationship history of abuse or stalking or something like that. And quite often abusers might have had an issue with their previous partner, and they're blaming them. They might say that it's because of they've got poor mental health, or they are stopping them from seeing their children because they're horrible people. And so I think it's worth noting, if there is real conflict with somebody with previous relationships, just to be mindful of that. And then also early on in the relationship, it might be very intense and move very quickly. There might be really early declarations of love, possessiveness, of jealousy. And this is all taken from this homicide timeline, which has been developed as a result of looking at over 400 domestic homicides. So quite often in those early relationships, and this is something we can really relate to as a service, is that we get that real intensity in a relationship, fast moving, looking for commitment quite early on. So they might make excuses to try and move in with you quickly. They might try and get you to show some sort of commitment, of love for them, but it might feel, that intensity might feel really romantic, almost fairy tale like. So it's quite important to kind of watch out for those feelings in a relationship and trust your gut. Does this feel like it's going a bit too quickly?
Carmel, thank you for that. I think that's hugely insightful, and I'm hopeful that people watching this video take heed of those real signs that you've identified there, and the work of Jane Monkton. That's brilliant stuff. So thank you very much, Carmel, for that input.
Oh, no problem at all. And I think it's worth mentioning as well, isn't it, the domestic violence disclosure scheme at this point. So if there is somebody who's concerned about a friend or family member, or for yourself, because maybe you've started in a relationship and there's some things that just aren't quite adding up, you might be worried that somebody's got a previous history of violence towards somebody, the domestic violence disclosure scheme, or otherwise known as Clare's Law, you can request the police if they have some information they're willing to share with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning Clare's Law. That's a real clear tactic that police will use to support vulnerable people, to give them the key information that they may need to manage relationships that just don't feel right. And there's two elements to that. There's the right to ask, and then there's the right to know, which actually police can take a proactive approach to supporting victims if there's information that we know about and that you become a new partner to. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate the update.
Great. So I suppose, what happens then after the beginning of a relationship where, that coercive controlling behaviour starts creeping in. It might creep in, as we've described, those kind of comments about what you're wearing, comments about who you're seeing. It might be that you invite friends or family around to the house and they act out and they make it really embarrassing or really difficult. They might humiliate you in front of them. So that is a form of trying to isolate you from your support networks, and that can quite often be another early sign where they're trying to kind of keep you all to themselves, or you want to go out with friends but they turn up with a home with a takeaway and a bottle of wine and want you to stay in and feel all sad that you're not going to. So it's those kind of things that start creeping in, and then once that early stages of controlling behaviour is crept in, you might find some other things creep in that are much more clear warning signs, such as aggression to control you. Silent treatment can also be used. You could even get to a stage where you are being kind of locked in the house, or your car keys removed, so you don't have that freedom of movement. It can be all types of things that don't involve like a physical assault, but are types of abuse that start to limit your physical freedoms.
When I go out with my partner, he'd say that I look nice. But when I go out with my friends, he'd start saying things like, "Are you going out like that?" or "looking like that?" and then laugh. He'd make me feel and question whether I did look nice. It was as if I could only look nice for him. At the beginning, we used to flirt over texts. So if I'd gone out with friends, I'd say I missed him, and he'd text me back saying the same. But then it moved up a notch, and he'd want to know where I was and what time I was going to be home. He'd ring me up if I didn't reply to his text, and he'd want more precision over when I was actually going to be home and when he was going to pick me up. It was just becoming more and more exhausting. I understand now that he was trying to isolate me. I just couldn't be bothered with all that, so I just stopped going out. I had a friend round for some tea once to have a catch up and a bottle of wine and watch a film, but then my partner turned up without notice and he made us feel really uncomfortable because he'd just sit there criticising what we were doing and what we were watching. She ended up leaving in the end, making up an excuse to go.
Okay, so Carmel, there's a term we hear quite a lot with CCB cases, or coercive and controlled behaviour cases, and that's called gaslighting. Are you able to talk through gaslighting and how an abuser may use it to exert their control over someone?
Yeah, thanks for bringing gaslighting up. I think for some people it might be quite a familiar term, but they might still not understand exactly what it means. But for some people, that it might be the first time that they've heard the term gaslighting. It came from a play where a man in the play would turn the gaslight down, and his wife would say, "It's getting darker in here," and he'd say, "No, no, no, that must be in your mind. It must be in your mind." It was a way of really making her start to doubt herself, her own senses, her ability to make sense of the world. And so that term has now been coined to explain that effect that abuser can have on somebody by kind of denying their own knowledge of the world. So it basically it leads to them feeling like they just can't trust themselves and their own instincts and their own gut. And it's a powerful tool to make people feel unable to take action. So it decreases their kind of space for which they can take action because they don't feel like they can trust themselves. And so some examples of this might be when you say to somebody, "Oh, you know, when you did this, I felt really upset. I really wish you wouldn't do that again." And they deny that it ever happened. Or they tell you that your recollection of events was wrong. It didn't happen like that. You know, you're imagining things, you know, or you're putting words into their mouth. So it's really just kind of chipping away, but it can be as subtle as people turning down lights, turning on heating. You know, we have had cases where, you know, people are moving towards smart homes, and we have had cases where people will, you know, turn the heating up or down as a way of control. So, no, you can't have the heating on, you're wasting money. But also, you know, from their smart device at home, they're fiddling with the heating, fiddling with the lighting, just making somebody feel like they've got no control, and then making them doubt themselves as to whether that's really happening. So, you know, it's that kind of, at first you can start to just doubt yourself and think, "Oh, maybe I didn't remember it like that, or maybe that didn't quite happen." But over a period of time, it really makes you doubt your ability to just make sense of things. It undermines your self-esteem, and it can happen over a long period of time, getting worse and worse to the point where, you know, somebody can be telling quite what would be considered quite blatant lies to an outsider, but to you, because you've had that over a long period of time, you're kind of in that world and you can't trust yourself enough to identify when somebody isn't really telling you the truth, or is kind of playing those mind games with you.
Okay. It really sounds like sometimes if you are in that relationship, Carmel, that these would be really difficult signs to spot in the abuser. But actually, I can see how this really undermines an individual's sanity. You know, it could make you even more reliant on the abuser. Would that be a fair assumption to make?
Yeah, it certainly can do in a lot of circumstances, because it can make you feel like that person is your anchor, and they kind of determine what is and isn't right with the world, and what is and isn't your reality, because they are constantly making you doubt yourself. And that can be, you know, something like you're out with friends and you come home and they say, "Oh, you were a bit loud tonight, you kind of dominated the conversation, you know, everybody felt a bit uncomfortable, didn't you notice it?" Or, you know, you've been with a friend and they said, I just don't think that friend likes you very much, you know. And over a period of time, those are really hurtful things, but you might take them as if they're trying to help you, they're trying to make you be a better person. So you can then just look to that person for all your kind of signs and knowledge about how things are working, but it can be very damaging to the person's self-esteem, person's sense of self-worth, and can make them feel very unable to take any action or feel like they deserve to be in the situation they're in, which is absolutely not the case.
And you mentioned there technology and the use of smart devices. It's also interesting or important to note, Carmel, that you alluded to earlier, that we understand that perpetrators of the coercive, controlling behaviour or abusive partners will use technology like mobile phones to track somebody's whereabouts and appear at those locations and be able to monitor what they're doing, so that then they can, in conversation, perhaps give the impression that they know more about that individual's life than one would expect. Is that a fair assumption to make, again, from myself, that it's almost like, am I right in thinking that individual was with me or not, because they actually turn up, or they know exactly what I did when I was out with my friends?
That's so true. And I think we all use technology hoping that we are a bit savvy. The technology in the palm of our hands can be really used as a kind of a weapon against us, and by somebody that you would hope that you know and love and trust, and that's the worst thing about it. So we've had lots of survivors find tracking apps on their phones, but even the most basic of apps can track you. So Snapchat can track your location. Well, all of them can track your location, and quite often we have people who are told or asked to share their location with their partner or the person who's abusing them permanently. So why wouldn't you want me to know where you are? Then I'll know that you're safe, and if anything happens or I can't hear from you, I can come and find you. Why wouldn't I want to know where you are? I love you. It's that kind of approach. But obviously, if somebody's then, like you said, kind of talking to you about your life experience and they weren't there, or maybe you didn't know they were tracking you, that can be really disorientating to think, well, how do they know I did that? And it might be that subtle that they drop in those little comments about where you've been, or questioning you about what you're doing and why you're doing it. We've had people who've had to produce receipts for shops. So if they've said they've gone to a shop, they've had to produce the receipt. If the time doesn't match when they say they went into the shop. So all of those methods of control, which do link to gaslighting for the reasons you said, that kind of making somebody think that you know more about them because you've been tracking them when they didn't know, that can be really, really disorientating and destabilizing and make you feel very vulnerable.
Thank you, Karen. That's super. So now we know what CCB is, we know what the term gaslighting refers to and what the signs are. I keep coming across you, Carmel, but are you able to talk through what your support services IDAS can provide to help someone support themselves or to speak to professionals?
Thanks, Al. And we offer a whole range of services at IDAS to support anybody who's experiencing domestic abuse or who's worried about their relationship and has some questions. And we do have a great working relationship with the police and other partner agencies in North Yorkshire and beyond in the areas we work. And we're really lucky, I think, to work so closely with yourselves to try and provide a really comprehensive set of support services for somebody. So there's a range of ways that you can get in touch with us, and you don't need to report to the police if you don't want to. You might just be starting to have some questions and be trying to make sense of things. So the first way you can get in touch with us is either by calling our helpline, or you can get in touch with us on our live chat on our website, which is between 3 and 6 p.m. at the moment, Monday to Friday, and that's at idas.org.uk. And you can also email us at info@idas.org.uk, and that's the first way to get in touch with us. Once you've got in touch with us, we will talk you through your options. We'll listen to you. It's a confidential service. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're not going to judge you. We're just going to listen and talk you through your options if that's what you would find useful. Once we've done that initial phone conversation where we're looking at safety and risk, what is your situation at the moment? You know, are you at risk? Can we do anything to help you to stay safe? After that initial phone call, we will outline our services. So that might be that you attend one-to-one support sessions, which at the moment are delivered on the telephone or via online meetings, but we will hope to be moving to face-to-face meetings again very soon. Or it might be group work, and we have adapted quite quickly and are starting to run some online groups. And in those groups, you're looking at some of the warning signs of domestic abuse, and also we're talking through some of the tools that we use to help people understand what's happening to them. And it's really about, you know, empowering people with the knowledge and information so that they can make informed choices about the best way forward for them. And we can do that in a number of ways, thinking about what will best suit that person at that time. So it's really kind of person-centered, thinking about whether it might be an onward referral to another service such as counselling, whether there's any support needed in terms of mental health or drugs and alcohol, but really, you know, a whole range of services that we really try and tailor to meet individuals' needs.
Gosh, that's outstanding, Carmel. Thank you so much. And to everybody that's watching, as with our last video, we'll put up a slide with all the contact numbers and web details for IDAS and other support services at the end of the video. But I guess a last message from me in terms of within the partnership, and the partnership is us, IDAS, North Yorkshire County Council and City of York. Together, we really have one objective in mind, and that is to protect and safeguard our most vulnerable victims of domestic abuse. So please, 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 my request to you all is, if you need our support or you are in a coercive and controlling relationship, that you make contact with us. We have professionals available across the agencies. We talk to each other about concerns that we have, and we have an absolutely outstanding relationship with all the sector. So thank you very much, Carmel. Truly outstanding update from yourself on behalf of your organisation, and I'm so grateful for the time you spent today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Al. And yeah, we'd absolutely second that. We would urge anybody who's concerned, whether it's for yourself or for a friend or family member, you know, do get in touch with us and we can answer any questions. You know, coercive and controlling behaviour can be a risk factor and can lead to some significant concerns for somebody's safety, even if there isn't violence. So please do get in touch with us if you have any concerns.
So now that we know what CCB is and what support there is out there for people who are experiencing this abuse, we'll move on to how the police deal with reports of coercive and controlling behaviour. So DC, Amy Beveridge, is with us today, and Amy has first-hand experience of investigating successfully prosecuting cases of coercive and controlling behaviour. Hi Amy, thanks for being here today.
Hello, sir.
Can you just talk through how a report of domestic abuse or coercive and controlling behaviour may arrive with you as an investigating officer?
So a report of controlling and coercive behaviour would arrive normally through our control room. It would normally come through as a domestic violence incident or threats to kill or threats of violence between partners. Following an investigation on that part, whether that's a statement or a video recorded interview, normally would start to see patterns of behaviour that would get alarm bells ringing. Following that, then looking at the points to prove around controlling and coercive behaviour, which is obviously a new legislation. That's where we'd make a decision during that investigation whether or not that was something that we would look at.
What's the first thing you do to determine if CCB is involved?
The first thing we would do would be to speak with the victim, whether that would be over the phone or whether that would be in a safe place, which sometimes wouldn't be at the home address, but maybe that they would come to the police station initially. And I would sort of get some information from the victim to find out their daily routine with their partner and what sort of things they would have to endure throughout that relationship or on a daily basis that wouldn't perhaps sit comfortable in a normal relationship.
Are there certain behaviours you see in a victim which set alarm bells ringing?
The main alarm bell for me from a victim is fear. They'll perhaps speak quietly on the phone. They'll be very anti-police, and it's not because they choose to be, it's because the fear of repercussion if they were found out to have spoken to us. But it is fear that I look for in a victim. Other things that we look for is if they start to disclose things about money, having no access to bank accounts or no access to any sort of funds. Or if they do, it's very limited. If they go to shops, they're given an amount of money to spend, and then that'll be checked on their return. Another thing we can look for is that isolation from friends and family, and also from work, the isolation from work colleagues as well, where they just feel that they've got nowhere to turn. But isolation and money tend to be the two biggest things that I find, and the fear of talking to police for repercussion.
How closely do you work with a victim, and what steps do you take to keep that victim safe as the investigating officer who's involved in taking proactive steps around that investigation and managing the victim?
So when we're dealing with an investigation with the victim, we do what's called a victim contact agreement, where we'll exchange email addresses and phone numbers. I have a works mobile number, and I'll advise the victim that they can contact me either by text message or by phone call at any time. And that's just to clarify any concerns that they may have or any worries, just to help alleviate that they have a number that they can contact. Because when they are isolated from friends and family, it can be very difficult. We also work with IDAS and partner agencies and our domestic abuse officers. They will construct a safety plan with the victim and myself, and we'll liaise between the three of us what plans are in place should the perpetrator turn up at the address. We have all sorts of aspire markers on the address and on mobile phone numbers, so we don't even have to speak to police. If a 999 call comes in from that number, we know then it's an emergency and that we have to attend that address. And that gives them some reassurance from their side.
Once something comes to court, is that it with your involvement?
No, definitely not. When we have a successful prosecution, sometimes we plead guilty, in which case the victim won't have to attend court. Other times, if we go not guilty, then we put in all sorts of measures. They're called special measures at court, whether that's through screens or through live link, or whether we use a video recorded evidence in chief, which can be used in court. And I'll be with that victim all the way through the court process. We can go in different entrances at court so they don't have to bump into the perpetrator. And also there have been cases where they've been brave enough to read their victim personal statement out in court, which can be impactful, certainly on sentencing for the judge. And I've sat next to them just to have that extra support whilst they read out their statements, because it's very emotional and it is a tough time for them.
If a victim needs further support, what do you do? And is that it? Or is there anything flares up in the future? Can we help?
So even, as I said, even after the court process, the victim still got my number and still got my email address. And a case that I had previously I was still involved with the victim even after the court case, and managed to sort of, we're going to organise some furniture for her due to circumstances that she found herself in. We'd help organise that through partner agencies such as IDAS or any other agencies that can be involved, which is why we obviously complete our public protective notices that go out to all our social care partners.
That's great, Amy. Thanks for talking to us today. I think that gives everybody an insight into what we do as an organisation and the factors we take into account. Hopefully this provides you with a further understanding of coercive and controlling behaviour and how to identify whether you or a friend or a family member is being subjected to this type of abuse. You also know from DC Beveridge that we do take reports of this type of abuse very seriously. It's an offence, and we have successfully sent abusers who engage in this behaviour to prison. We have also supported and safeguarded a whole range of victims and helped them to get their life back on track. So if you're watching this and you believe you are a victim of abuse, please tell someone. You can report it to police on 101, or if you're on an immediate risk of harm, always dial 999 and we will respond to you as soon as we can. If you don't want to talk to police, you can contact IDAS directly. We've heard from Carmel today the outstanding levels of service and opportunities that are available virtually at this very challenging time. And these details will be on screen in a moment. You can also contact Supporting Victims in North Yorkshire, who can help and support victims of crime. Their details will be available too in a moment. I think the most important thing is not to suffer in silence. Without any doubt, that's the most important message. Please tell someone, reach out and get some help. Please, you are not alone, and we are here waiting to help you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Take care.